Picture this. You wake up in America in the year 2025. You stretch, you yawn, you grab your phone, and before you even get out of bed, you're already hit with 3 notifications reminding you that the dream of homeownership is now about as realistic as getting drafted into Hogwarts. Congratulations, you're alive in the wealthiest country on earth, and somehow you still can't afford a 1-bedroom apartment that doesn't feature the occasional raccoon roommate in the listing. And that brings us to today's topic: how we got here, why everything feels impossible, and what exactly happened between the generation that bought houses for the price of a used bicycle and us, the people who get celebrated for finally paying off a credit card. Because if you've ever looked at your bank account and thought, who stole all the money? The answer is, well, complicated. And also, not that complicated. Because someone did end up with all the money, and spoiler alert, it wasn't you. Now let's start with the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the entire zoo, the baby boomers. And listen, before any boomers watching click away to write a Facebook post starting with "kids these days," just hang on. This isn't an attack video. This is an educational documentary, okay? It just happens to be an educational documentary where sometimes the narrator yells a little bit. So let's talk history. After World War II, America did something we haven't tried in a while. It invested in itself. College was cheap, housing was cheap. Jobs were everywhere. The economy was expanding like a sourdough starter during lockdown. If you were born between 1946 and 1964, the escalator of upward mobility was basically waiting for you with an express-only, no ticket required sign. And here's the wild part. All you had to do was step onto it. You didn't need to be brilliant. You didn't need to invent an app. You didn't need to post thirst traps on Instagram for brand deals. You barely needed a degree. You just needed to exist. And exist they did. They got the houses, the pensions, the stable jobs, the low healthcare costs, the unions, the cheap college degrees, the affordable cities, the economic tailwinds. And now they control more wealth than any generation in human history. The Washington Post recently pointed out that boomers hold around $85 trillion of wealth. 85 trillion. That's not a number, that's a villain's ransom demand in a Marvel movie. But here's where the story twists. Even though boomers became the wealthiest generation ever, the generations after them, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, are on the struggle bus, which is itself 3 payments behind and held together with duct tape. Why? Well, everything got more expensive, and I don't mean inflation expensive. I mean, did this apartment come with solid gold countertops? Expensive. A year at a public university now costs nearly 4 times what it did in 1970, adjusted for inflation. The median home price is more than double what it was, also adjusted for inflation. And on top of all that, we have the housing crisis. If you've been trying to buy your first home, congratulations. The National Association of Realtors just announced that first-time home buyers hit a historic low of 21%, and the median age of a first-time buyer is now 40, not 30, not 25, 40. People are buying their first house at the age when boomers were already lecturing their kids about fiscal responsibility. And why is it so bad? Well, boomers didn't just walk onto the escalator, they also kind of, clogged it. Not all of them, of course, but enough to reshape the system. Over the past few decades, many local governments, heavily influenced by older homeowners, used their voting power to block new housing construction. They didn't want taller buildings, denser housing, or new developments anywhere near their precious property values. They basically looked at younger generations and said, good luck, but not here. And here's another fun fact. Most of the political leaders for the past 30 years, boomers, presidents, senators, governors, like a greatest hits album you didn't ask for. And what did they do with all that power? Well, they kept giving themselves tax cuts, Medicare expansions, Social Security protections, and then paid for it all with borrowed money. Nearly $30 trillion of debt piled onto the national credit card, to be handed to the next generations like a family heirloom nobody wants. And while all of that was happening, industries got deregulated left and right. Telecom? Deregulated. Banking? Deregulated. Cable? Oh boy, super deregulated. And now we're living in a world where everything costs more, the fees are everywhere, and complaining to customer service is basically just screaming into a void. But let's get back to the boomers' wealth, because here's the twist. There's a lot of it, but not everyone's going to get it. Forbes recently announced that the great wealth transfer might fall short of expectations. Why? Because boomers live longer. Medical costs are exploding. A lot of wealth is tied up in houses their kids might not even want, and some families are, well, not exactly sending each other Christmas cards. Plus, a ton of wealthy boomers plan to give millions to charity instead of their kids. Honestly, respect. But also, ouch. And even though trillions will eventually transfer, it's not going to magically fix the systemic problems young people are dealing with. Because while some people inherit money, others inherit debt, and inequality gets deeper. The Michigan Journal of Economics recently pointed out that this wealth transfer could actually increase inequality because most of the money comes from a small elite group of boomers who already own most of the assets. So if you're hoping that some magical inheritance is going to swoop in and save you, the unfortunate reality is that unless your parents have a house that looks like it could host a season of Succession, the wealth transfer may be less life-changing windfall and more here's your share of the old lawnmower. But here's the real question: what do we do about all this? And the answer is not to yell at individual boomers, even though, let's be honest, it can feel satisfying sometimes. The real issue isn't personal, it's structural. Boomers didn't build the escalator, they just rode it at the perfect time. The question now is, how do we rebuild an escalator that actually moves for everyone, not just people who were lucky enough to step onto it in 1975? And for younger generations, here's the weird silver lining. The problems are finally big enough that everyone's talking about them. Housing reform isn't radical anymore. Student loan reform isn't a fringe idea. Younger voters are showing up. Political power is shifting. Even some boomers agree the system needs fixing. And as much as we joke about generational conflict, the truth is we're all stuck in the same country together. The only way out of this mess is forward, ideally into a society where people under 40 can buy homes without needing a small miracle or a GoFundMe. So yeah, the situation is bad. Sometimes it's hilarious in a dark way. Sometimes it feels like we're all NPCs trapped in a simulation where the settings are messed up. But the first step to fixing anything is understanding how it got this way. And now you do. So if you're watching this from your tiny apartment, wondering if you'll ever own anything more valuable than your air fryer, just remember, it's not your fault. You're not imagining it. The system really is stacked, and no amount of budgeting will magically solve a structural crisis. But also remember that systems can change. They have before, and they will again. Especially when the people stuck at the bottom of the escalator decide they're tired of waiting for it to move.